name is Asia Banks, and I am a first-year MBA student, as well as an admissions and sports entrepreneurship fellow. I have the pleasure of introducing our special guests, including Dr. Homaira Akbari, and our sponsors, the MBA clubs, Tepper Women in Business, Tepper Consulting Club, and the Graduate Entrepreneurship Club, the Swartz Center for Entrepreneurship, and the undergraduate student club, Smart Women's Securities. Again, thank you to our special guests and sponsors. We ask that you silence all of your electronics and open any noisy food items like chips or drinks now so that we can have a quiet while we are having a conversation. Thank you. So I will kick off everything with a brief introduction of our speaker. Dr. Akbari graduated from MSIA, now the Tepper School of Business, in 1996. Her impressive professional journey has led her to her current role as President and CEO of AKnowledge Partners, LLC, a global strategy advisory firm providing services to leading equity funds, private equity funds, and large corporations in the sectors of Internet of Things, data and analytics, cybersecurity, and supply chain visibility. She serves on the board of directors of several Fortune 500 companies and is a contributor to many nonprofit organizations. We're excited to hear Dr. Akbari's industry and leadership insights. I will turn the floor over to our moderator, Shauna Friday, a junior board member of the Tepper Women in Business Club, committee member of the Graduate Entrepreneurship Club, and Swartz Entrepreneurship Fellow.
Thanks, Asia, for that great introduction, and thank you again, Homaira, for joining us today. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about your path to leadership. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the major decision points you had in your professional and personal life?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I apologize for a few minutes delay. What is interesting for me is when you ask that question, I think my career or my life has been defined by reinventing myself a number of times. The very first one was actually Carnegie Mellon because I did a PhD in physics, in particle physics, and went ahead and started a postdoc at European Center for Nuclear Research. And after 4 years, I decided that wasn't the right thing for me to do. And I didn't know what else to do. And I remember I was in this flight with a business person, and I was just saying, my challenges and whatnot. And he goes, "Oh, just go to business school. You'll figure it out." And I'm like, "Oh, business school. Okay, I'll go to business school." And I was lucky to become a member of Carnegie Mellon family by coming to Carnegie Mellon. And really my transition from being a physicist or a pure scientist, and I was truly a pure scientist, I didn't know alphabet of business, to become a business person was I would say was pretty rocky. So in Carnegie Mellon I had to learn a lot. And while in physics I was used to work very, very hard because that's what poor physicists do, what I learned in Carnegie Mellon is the volume of work they give you is 100 times more than what you should do. So, but it is done by purpose. I mean, the whole concept, and that's how business is forever. You always have more to do. You always have more to read. So the question is, what do I read? How do I read? Which parts do I read? How do I prioritize? But it's very hard for a physicist to figure that out because I wanted to read everything. And I was working so hard. And if I have a regret is I didn't spend as much time in the parties with other students because I was always working because I thought, oh, I got to read A to Z. And it was tough because I was very successful in physics, and here I am in business, and it seemed like I am not so successful, even though eventually I graduated in the top 10% and whatnot. But that was sort of with brute force. So that was the first really pivot that I did in my life. And then from then on, when I left business school, it was the same story. I didn't know what to do. And so somebody said, "Oh, you don't know what to do, go to consulting." I'm like, "Oh, that's good." And it's absolutely the truth. So I end up doing consulting. But when I left Carnegie Mellon and got into consulting, that's when I realized I love technology. And it made sense because, I was in experimental physics, and experimental physics is nothing but technology, really. And so that was the first discovery I made, that doesn't matter what I would do in my life, I will always be in technology. So I started consulting, I enjoyed that, and at some point I decided I wanted to go back to Europe, and I started getting into corporate world. So that was really second pivot that I did, going from consulting to corporate world. And in corporate world, I decided, I already knew in Carnegie Mellon I want to be leader. I was one of the leaders of the game class that we had, and I think I was the first woman ever winning the game, and I was so proud of myself. And so I knew I wanted to be in the leadership position. So when I went to corporate world, very quickly I decided I want to be, head of business. I want to be CEO, and I sort of worked my way towards that. But I left corporate world to entrepreneurship, and that was, I would say, another pivot that I did in my life, and ran a company for 6 years called Skybits out of Washington, D.C., sold it in mid-2012 to a public company. And that was really the last pivot I've done, which was a little bit came by surprise and without me thinking about it in an active way, which is getting really to business, to being board of directors business in governance, but and also advising private equity on what to do and what not to do. So that would be the last pivot where I'm in it, and I'm happy to, of course, expand more on it.
Thank you. So going along your theme of reinvention, so moving from being a pure scientist into business and into the core leadership team, can you tell us a little bit about how you might have had to change some of the way that you approached your work?
How would I have changed it? They always say, like, the way life is, you basically should not change anything. You always, when you look at your past. But there is no question what matters most in businesses is people and the culture of an organization and how you actually work together and how you collaborate together. And that has always been true forever. I mean, even when there was a command and control type of, command from the top, even then, effectively how you organize people, talent, and whatnot. But it's becoming even more important. What was interesting for me, a few weeks ago, I was having lunch with a friend of mine who is French-American. I'm French-American, but he was born in France. And he was telling me how his relationship with his children is very different than it was his parents with him, where his parents were command and control, kind of like really punish him quite badly if something didn't go right. And that he doesn't do that. And I said, well, what has changed? I said, oh, so the children have changed. He goes, no, actually the children didn't change. It's the parents who have changed. And I think I think in the organization, the people who work in the organization haven't changed. It's really the leadership of organizations which change, where they've realized that you can't anymore being like, this is the way I think, you have to do it, but it's really the consensus building and engaging each one. I've reached the point of what leadership means when I started working in Microsoft, because I was working before that, coming out of consulting, I went to a very, I would say, traditional organization where it was command and control. And, I was pretty high up. I had my own assistant, and I saw all other bosses got their assistant to print their emails. So I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that, because I like very much look at what other people do. And so I had my assistant responding to my emails, and then I found out that she felt like she's very powerful. So she would just not let some certain people to reach me, which is a problem. When I got to Microsoft, I realized even Bill Gates, they read each email they receive and they respond to each email they receive, like the biggest bosses of Microsoft. And assistants would never, ever print your emails for you. So I all of a sudden realized, and that was already, I think, the theory that today we have, each person in an organization has an economic value. And that means they cannot do a work which is less important than others. Even an executive assistant, so that our executive assistants in Microsoft, they'd organize really, I mean, they were still assistant, but they never read your emails or printed your emails, or made you coffee for that matter. But they really did, were value-added activities. So that's what I think so no matter where you are in the organization, you have to do value-added activity, and you have to expect others to do that, i.e. you never can put the work you're supposed to do to someone else, and everybody will have administrative or whatever work it has to be done. So I think that that's sort of my approach to leadership, if that's helpful.
Thank you. So you mentioned that consensus building and collaborating are very important to you. So can you tell us a little bit about whether you were mentored or when you were mentored, and whether you enjoy mentoring other leaders in business?
So I definitely do enjoy mentoring others, but I mean, I think the more interesting question is, how do you find mentors? What is a mentorship? And so when I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was looking for mentors. And you always do that, and that's great. And I've read tons of situations where people said, "Oh, this person was my mentor, and he helped me." And we know from Jamie, what happened to Jamie Dimon. He had a major mentor, and then it didn't work out. My philosophy about mentor, at least the way it worked out for me, is I didn't necessarily have a single person who followed me from A to Z, nor a single person who completely understood all my sort of ambitions and where I wanted to go. So I sort of built mentors more by really asking people for advice, listening to them a lot. And over time I've learned to ask people for advice of all sort of levels, including my nieces, and they're 4.5 years old. And I truthfully learned from them, and I asked them questions. So I think that's what you have to do. It is not easy, and I think having good mentor is who can actually follow all of your career from sort of A to Z or almost A to Z is very helpful. I don't know whether it's easy for everyone to find that. So therefore, it's important more to make a lot of observations and make a decision yourself. So as you grow in your career, obviously, you'll find out that you will have less and less possibility to have mentors because you keep growing up in your career. And that becomes where even this observation level that I would talk about, talking to different people, asking them different questions, and sort of at the end, you have to make your decision, and it is you who's responsible for it. So, and at some point, I think your reference systems and experiences become so deep that not the question of not asking other people their views, but that you're able to make those decisions or those thoughts yourself. One of the things I love is learning, and I think that I'm all about learning, and that means you learn from books, you learn from articles, but most importantly, you learn from other people.
Thank you. So switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that a love of technology has been an underlying theme across your whole career. And here in the room, we have undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty, and alumni from across the school. So can you tell us a little bit about how you have been flexible and adaptable to changes in technology over the course of your career?
Sure. There's no question that if you're in technology world, you better be ready to keep changing. So I think that, again, there is just being open and really realizing how the trends are changing and what is becoming very important. Like back in 2000, I actually, what is today called Internet of Things, I started working on those topics, except it wasn't called IoT at the time. It was called telematics. And GPS, purely GPS, whereas the name GPS, which was the satellites, but people would use that, or GPS-based solutions. So what is interesting about technology, there are some technologies which have been around for a long, long time, but several things about them. Either the affordability of the cost, or what was enablers, like in case of IoT, you have to have very low cost communications protocols and services. Well, in 2000, it was so expensive and so impossible to do those things. Either those didn't exist, or sort of the use cases were not so well defined, so people didn't know how to use it. But there's no question that when you think about a lot of work we do is reliant on communication. So for example, what's going to happen in 5G and the low latency, not just high speed rate, is going to completely revolutionize a lot of things that we want to do and we're trying to do, and that they are not really as easy to do. Therefore, we don't think they're high tech, but in fact they could be if you provided them low latency, higher speed communications. So that's one area that you have to think about. So not all technology is born yesterday. Some of them are actually born 2-3 decades ago, but they're just not, the usage of it is not possible because they depend on other pieces of the ecosystem. But then, things like robotism, that is very big in this city and this university, or AI, there's no question that there is, innovation happening there, or blockchain. And when you look at technology, you have to be open that there is, Gartner has a very good graph which shows is going through its innovation, maturity, and then decline. So you have to kind of understand where it is in that curve and how you want to interact with it. You want to take advantage of it, you want to jump on the bandwagon. There's no question in technology we have a lot of also hype. Something gets really hyped, and then people like IoT for a while was very hyped, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, it's not really applicable to everything, or we don't have 5G yet. We have to wait till 5G happens. Blockchain is a little bit like that. Having said that, I am a great believer in IoT, blockchain. To me, cybersecurity is not per se a technology. It uses technology to do certain things, but I'm also a great believer that cybersecurity and innovation in cybersecurity will be there, because forever we're just going to have competition between good guys and bad guys. And both of them happen to be really smart. In fact, bad guys may be smarter than good guys. So those are some of the areas that I am very interested and very passionate about.
So you mentioned, and as we all here know, Carnegie Mellon is pretty well known in a lot of the fields that you focus on. So what are some of your thoughts on how CMU prepares our graduate and undergraduate students?
I think very well. Obviously I was here more than 20 years ago, and everything changes, obviously. And so I think the university has changed a lot, and for better, for what I see. And I think Bob Damon's initiative to have bring more the technology with business school together is very interesting. It's part of the reason I've joined the BBA. Not just Carnegie Mellon, I think any school probably doesn't prepare students enough for real life business, which is a lot of things such as, I think negotiation, you never have enough on how to learn to negotiate, how it used to be you would always outmaneuver your, the party across the table. Today, we don't think that's really the best situation, because you're building ecosystem and your partners have to be successful. If they're not, you won't be. But understanding that ecosystem relationship and how do you negotiate within an ecosystem which is interdependent is very important. And then, again, back to organization, really understanding how interpersonal interactions are important in business. I think there's just no university does enough about it, just because they are hard topics and hard things to learn in classroom. So you have to learn it more on experimenting than anything else.
So along those lines, can you tell us a little bit about some of the traits that you found you've had to develop outside of the academic environment to make you a successful business leader?
So one of the, like maybe talking about more recent career I've had is being in governance, right? Being in board of directors. So you know, obviously you're with tons of very smart people in a room, and you're making really difficult decisions, or in some ways these are very high-level decisions because you don't make decisions that, everyday thing that the company has to do. So you have to understand what's the impact of the decisions you're making. And one of the things that you learn is how to influence. And influencing both in terms of your point of view, but also influencing the direction of a company at pretty high level. And it's very hard to discern, like they give you 2,000-3,000 pages to read for every board meeting, some of them. And you're like, okay, it's back to Carnegie Mellon. How do I read all those pages, and what do I get out of it? And what questions do I ask, which adds value? So I think that is really hard to learn, and it's something that, again, it's very hard to learn in the classroom, but you would learn it in situations where, in a board of directors, if you're the last one to speak, all of your colleagues have said everything you've already thought about. So what is the last thing that you have to say? If you're the last one to speak, what is the thing that you would say that everybody says, wow? Because there are, I don't want to say obvious or mundane questions, but there are certainly some of the obvious questions that you can ask, and always the first ones who speak ask those questions. So for me, the challenge, in a good way, is to find out when do I speak, and what I say, what is the value, at what stack of value does it sit? And I mean, this may sound trivial, but it's not.
So along those lines, especially with those specific skills that you mentioned, have you found that you had to develop skills in a different way or a different method because you have been a woman business leader in pretty male-dominated industries?
Not particularly, but I mean, there's definitely a difference in gender, i.e. you get a little bit different treatments, and less now on the board of directors. More, I think, when you're in the organizations. But my philosophy about gender and about being a woman is, I mean, the more you think about it, the more it becomes an issue, or it becomes a thing. I don't think about it. I was born in a family where there's 6 girls, 1 boy, and the boy is right in the middle, and I was just younger than the boy, like by less than 2 years. So, I think it's very important what happens when you're a really young child, and thank God my parents were didn't care and didn't try to prioritize the boy. So I grew up with feeling I can do anything I want to, and that has been very important for me. And having said that, there's no question I have observed against myself, against other people, gender sort of biases, but I think you just roll it off your back and move on, because the more you think about it, the more it becomes sort of something. And I think that, of course, the world is very different today than it was 2 decades ago, 4 decades ago, 5 decades ago, and so I think that men and women today are facing different problems than we did before. I guess if I add something there, one of the things I do in life is I don't believe anything is similar to something I've seen before, or I never believe that you should imagine that, oh, this is exactly like what happened before, so I would react towards that. And it's almost never true that any situation is similar to another situation. Every situation is unique, and that's what I got from science. You just basically observe, you collect data, information, and you react towards that. Obviously, experience matters, I hope so, because otherwise as you age, your value goes down. But the more important thing is, the ability to sort of collect data, have the openness for observation, and then make decisions based on that. And that's what, that I think experience will help you to understand how to analyze that data, how to process it, and how to actually make decisions. And I think that's really important, because I think majority of people always think every situation is the same, or they go back to something that's happened, and that's where the mistake happens, because as soon as you do that, you're missing something.
Thanks. So we have one more question for our moderated session, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. So my last question is, do you have any advice that you would give your younger self, given that we have a lot of undergraduate and graduate students listening here today?
I think resilience is the advice that I would give, i.e., be true to what you like. If you like something, go after it. Don't say, oh, you know what, I like this, but this is maybe the economic return is lower, or because when you're happy in what you do, you definitely perform better. And I know that in some of the questions there was work and life balance. I think that's also very important. I mean, to try to practice that at a younger age. I mean, I didn't, and I am doing it now. I'm lucky that I can do that. But earlier in my career, it was 100% or whatever, 90% work and 10% something else. Family and work, and outside of work. But I think that now the society has become more conscious that that's quite important. So you have the opportunity to have a better work-life balance than I did.
Great, thank you. And with that, we'll open the floor up for Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll repeat the question so we have it on the microphone. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for your wisdom that you've shared with us. I could truly think about myself as a leader, and I'm truly inspired by your experience. Ma'am, I'm a student of cybersecurity. I'm from Hines College, and my question is related to cybersecurity, since your company deals with consulting in cybersecurity. I've observed certain new trends in cybersecurity related to artificial intelligence and blockchain, and I know that these two are disruptive technologies in the sector right now. What's your opinion on the kind of disruption that's coming to the market right now? How are the clients being affected by it, especially with policies like GDPR and new policies which are being initiated by the American and other governments like China and India? I would like to know your opinion about it, and how much value do you see as a consultant in bringing these technologies on board for your clients?
So the question was about disruptive technologies, her perspective on disruptive technologies in the business space and as well as policy.
Actually, I think GDPR, of course, as you know, went into act May of the last year, and May of this year there's something else which is going to act, which is it's payments, PSD2, which is for ability of anyone to say, I want all of my data from one bank to go to another bank, and then you have all of the privacy identity information going from one to another. Cybersecurity, I actually come out from a keynote speech of cybersecurity. When you look at cybersecurity, it's a very fragmented with many, many, many subsegments. So there is no single way to define, oh, here is 2 trends, 3 trends. It depends which parts of it you take. But I would say that there's no question that there has been already talked about, but the reality hasn't happened, but it's going to happen to consolidation of physical with cyber. So today we're still separated, but I believe that over time these will converge. And in heart of that sits something called identity. 81% of breaches in cybersecurity is due to stolen or weakened credentials. So 81% of your data loss is due to that. 81% of your endpoint, your malwares on your websites. So I am a great believer that identity sits at the heart of that, and it's both on the authentication side, but also on the protection side of it. It's an area which has been severely, partially, I would say, overlooked in cybersecurity, but it's an area that I think will become more and more important. You add to that, so you have people identity, obviously. You add to that IoT, you're just like crazy. So in terms of cybersecurity is so much about data. I mean, people say, oh, cybersecurity is but really at the end, there are a couple of theories that are, not theories, but beliefs that many people now start to believe. One is, you have to have security embedded from scratch in everything you do. So you really have, so that's one thing. And secondly, you have to believe you're going to be, breached. So what do you do after you're breached? So those are the more, so hence why data observation, what is now called silent authentication or user behavioral analytics is like, it's no longer enough to have a static passwords, which even if it's biometrics, because they can be copied, but it's just your behavior. What do you do? Where you go? How do you interact with your app, with your mobile phone? And all of that is nothing but data. So so I think, obviously, and blockchain, the big thing about blockchain is what's called decentralization of identity. And ability to provide information without giving away any credentials is something that blockchain will bring to the table. But the topic is vast, so I can't say this covers everything.
Thank you. Do we have another question in the floor here? Go ahead.
Can you touch on why you decided to leave a corporate job that might have a lot more stability and pursue a startup? What kind of led you to do that?
The question was about how she decided to switch from the stability of a corporate job and enter the world of entrepreneurship.
Yes, I was always, when I went to consulting, one of the things that company was doing was we worked a lot with private equity and venture guys. So I kind of was quite, and it was hype of 99, 2000. So I was already had the bug a little bit in myself, but it wasn't as conscious of decision, I have to say. It was because I got headhunted. I just had lots of relationships with venture guys and private equity. So I networked. I mean, one of the big thing. I should have said networking is very, very important. And networking, when you do networking, it shouldn't be, I know 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people. You actually really have to have interest. You want to know this person not because they can provide you something, but you want to really know them because what they're doing is related to what you're doing. And then before you know it, it's like 2 days ago, somebody contacted me and said, we used to have offices next to each other in this company. And I'm like, I don't remember him. But I went and looked at his picture, I go, oh yeah, I remember him. And he contacted me now for a very interesting opportunity, which is like, wow. So I think that but I got headhunted. I mean, I basically one of the partners but I knew what to do with a startup, or it wasn't quite a startup. It was already several tens of millions in revenues. So, but it was still in that it was venture and PE backed. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think that you just have to. It's what I said. Go with your gut. I mean, if you want to do that, do it. Life is too short to try to stay in a corporate world when you're not happy.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Deepak. So thank you so much for sharing your previous experiences, and especially early on in your career when you were in business school and when you moved to consulting, you were trying to figure out what you wanted to do. I think a lot of us here are in a similar position, and some of us may be going to consulting for that same reason too. But what I want to know is, at that stage in your career, what were you doing? Like when you're not sure where you want to go forward, but what did you still keep doing to build yourself up to whatever may come up? I'm curious to hear.
The question was about when you're faced with uncertainty about the future of your career, how do you go forward?
It is a hard question. So maybe I want to share with you, I think, a pretty cute story. At the time, it was also then cute, but not as cute as now. And it is a Carnegie Mellon story, so I think you all deserve to hear it. So when I came to Carnegie Mellon with a PhD, right, and I soon found out that I was told I'm overqualified. I'm like, what? They're like, you're overqualified. Why do you want this job? I'm like, I really want it, please. They're like, no. So the hardest year was, the summer internship. I basically was overqualified. Nobody wanted to take me as summer intern because, they're like, oh, this is analyst work or da-da-da. And I was like, I must, and that made me feel like I must find a summer internship. And it has to be a normal job, not like a really high-level job, because I have to show I can do this. But I couldn't get a single interview. So somebody, I can't remember his name, actually in placement office suggested something to me, which is, hey, why don't you hang out here? And I would tell you when an appointment is canceled and you can get in. So there came a company called BOC Gases, and I got this hint that this very star person for all summer interns, he couldn't go because he already had 5 offers, and he's decided where to go, so he canceled. So there's like this 20 minutes interview, and I just slipped into the room, and the 2 interviewers said, you're not, I don't remember the name of the person, even Andrew Leto. I'm like, no, I'm not. My name is Homaira Akbari, here's my resume. And they're like, and I basically sold myself during that interview. And I end up getting the summer internship because they're like, wow, this girl. And by the way, then CEO of BOC Gases to this date is a mentor of mine, although not, we've had situations where we haven't been in touch for 5 years, but then we get in touch with each other. So it wasn't like a steady, but somewhat of a mentor and role model, more than mentor, I would say role model. But it was amazing. And that resulted in my second year, I got like 5 offers because I actually did that. Because then people said, oh, she actually can do these things. But it was, so my point is, you have short-term goal and long-term goal. And if your short-term goal is you ought to get the summer internship because it was very important as a step in what you needed to do next, you just do it, you figure it out. And so that's what I meant to earlier, I said resiliency. There's no question resiliency is very important. And secondly, I'm a dreamer, but I'm also a person who understands constraints because I was in physics, and physics is also always multi-constrained, multi-dimensional problem. And I think business is like that. So what you want to do is you want to optimize. So at almost each year, maybe, I don't want to say each day, but each year, you kind of want to figure out who you are, what are your values for people or companies, and how do you position yourself now? And it's very important to do that because if you don't, you sometimes would find you're completely out of value and you haven't thought about that. So understanding what are your capabilities, but also the environmental constraints, because, and what I was saying about gender, just knowing that, whatever the constraint is, not necessarily worrying about it. It's very different. But so being somewhat a dreamer, but also realistic is I think it's what makes you successful.
Great, thank you. And we have time for one more question before Dean Damon has closing remarks.
Hi, my name is Olga, and I'm an MBA student. You mentioned how you appreciate learning from others and how you value. If you can share something that you learned from others that was of a great value to you, or maybe even surprised you, or changed the way you think about things.
That surprised me?
The question was, sure. The question was, what's something unexpected that you learned from someone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think, sure, it's just like learning from others is listening to people. And this is not just business people. It could be, as I mentioned, my nieces, my friends, even movies, even, role models, even people you read about in newspaper. I'm like, somewhat sad for me, but there's a very famous executive now, Carlos Ghosn, which is in Japan, and he's in jail for 2 months. And this is a man that has made an amazing impact for those 3 companies, by the way, and in the industry. Now, I'm not going to become the judge of what he's done is wrong or right. I mean, there's unquestionably, if such accusations are right, they're not, that's quite bad. But one of the faults that Carlos, despite the fact that I've had a lot of respect for him, and because I'm French American and I go to France a lot, so I know his former boss, and one of the faults he's had, he thought he was above everyone and above the water and above, and so I learn from that. I read that story and I say, no matter how big you are, how important you are. I mean, Carlos Ghosn had at one point power that told the current French president of France, go to hell, I do what I want. I mean, that person being, so the world is no longer like you're the god and nobody, you're untouchable. So it's very important to realize, you can't get away with things, and you have to be somebody who does things right in life, because if you don't, no matter how big or important you are. So that's how I learn, and that goes from everything.
Thank you. And thank you again for joining us today, Dr.
Sure,
Akbari.
thank you for having me.
Dean Damon has a few closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Well, Homaira, thank you so much for being here. How about a round of applause, please? Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here and to provide those inspiring remarks about yourself, about your career. I think our students will walk away and remember for a long time what you've had to say today. It's always great to have very successful alumni back to talk to our students. It gives them sort of the confidence that they themselves will be here one day, and we expect all of you to do that. I want to thank you again for being here. Homaira mentioned earlier, and I want to mention it again, that she has agreed to be on the Tepper School's Business Board of Advisors. And for those of you that may not know, the Business Board of Advisors for the Tepper School is a collection of senior alumni who come to the Tepper School. They provide advice, strategic advice to the dean and to the school. And I want to thank you for agreeing to do that as well.
Oh, thank you.
In appreciation for your time spent here today with us, I would like to give you this small token of appreciation. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
And thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you.